Today is Sunday, June 28th, 2020. My name is Jeremiah Ellis. I'm interviewing on behalf of the African American Interpretive Center of Minnesota, recording over the phone with Sharon Sund. Thank you for being here and sharing your story.
You're welcome. Sharon Roberson Sund. Yes.
Fantastic. Sharon, will you state your name again and make sure we have the spelling absolutely correct?
It's Sharon, S-H-A-R-O-N, Roberson, R-O-B-E-R-S-O-N, Sund, S-U-N-D.
Wonderful. Thank you. So let's start. When and where were you born?
I was born February 4th, 1958 in Tacoma, Washington on McCord Air Force Base.
And so I presume that means you're had a parent in the military?
Yes, my dad was in the military, in the Air Force.
Great. Tell us a little bit about your father.
Well, he is one of three sons. He's the oldest, and he joined the military when he was 18. He could have been an officer because he tested high enough on the entrance exam. They offered him they offered to send him to officer school, but he was enlisting with some of his friends, and he just said he didn't want to do it. I asked him later if he regretted it, and he said, yeah, he probably should have gone and done it, but he was young, and it didn't seem like a good idea to him. But he stayed in for 20 years and retired after 20 years in 1976. So,
and where was he born?
He was born in Water Valley, Mississippi. Right. And my mother was born in Doddsville, Mississippi. And soon after that, my father, soon after, it's an interesting, just a real brief story about how he ended up moving to Memphis, because that's where he grew up, and that's where my family still resides. But his father was a sharecropper, and my father was a baby, and my grandfather tells the story that he was good. He could read and he could figure. That means he could do numbers in his head. He'd only gone through the 6th grade. But the sharecropper, he would bring in his share, the crops, and the sharecropper was adding up what he owed him, and he was changing the numbers. And my grandfather told him, wait a minute, you're not adding that up right. And the landowner reached under his desk and pulled out a gun and slapped it on the table and looked at him, as if to say, if you question my numbers, I've got this gun here to answer you. And so my grandfather knew that he would never get away. He would be locked into that landowner for life if he didn't do something. So he ended up deciding to run away in the night, one night, and he left my grandmother and my father, and I think he had one other son, and he went off to Memphis, got a job, got a place to stay, and then came back and got them again in the middle of the night. And because by then the landowner had let it be known that if he saw him anywhere, he was going to kill him. And that went on until the day the landowner died. So my grandfather had that hanging over him.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And so how did your parents meet?
They met in Memphis through a classmate of my father's who knew my mother and introduced them. And Sylvester was a family friend. As a matter of fact, I flew home to go to his funeral because he was like an uncle to me. They stayed friends all those years.
And so how did you come to Minnesota and then later move to Plymouth?
Well, I was in Memphis in high school. We had traveled around, and then when my grandmother got sick, my father got a medical leave to move to get stationed in Blytheville, Arkansas. So he drove back and forth 70 miles every day. Home, and we lived in Memphis, and I went to my guidance counselor, and since I had lived all over, I really wanted to move to the Midwest, and so I said I want a small private school in the Midwest, and she pulled out a brochure from McAllister, and I applied and was accepted, and they gave me good scholarship money to come here, and I've been here ever since. And I was living in I've lived in St. Paul, and then after I graduated, I got a job in Bloomington and moved out there, and then bought a townhouse in Eagan. And then I decided, this is too isolating, so I rented out my townhouse and moved downtown Minneapolis. I met my husband at work, got married, and moved to Champlin. And then we lived there for a couple of years, and after our son was born, Champlin was there was a lot of cornfields in those days, and my husband is Norwegian and Swedish, so we're a biracial marriage. And it was too isolating to be in an environment where there were people like myself. So I wanted to be closer to the city, and but we also wanted a good schools for our son. And my husband was working in Plymouth, so we ended up moving to Plymouth. It was about 5 minutes from where my husband worked, and 15 minutes from downtown Minneapolis.
And so what year were you in Champlin?
1997 to 99. We moved to Plymouth in July 1st, 1999.
What was your other experiences in Champlin like, in general?
Well, I didn't meet any of the neighbors. There was just nothing. I don't know. It was just living in a house in a city on a street, and it was just a place to live. It wasn't like it was. I mean, we'd have people over occasionally, but there was nothing much there. No community.
And so how did Plymouth become the ideal place for you to settle?
Well, I don't know if I'll say ideal, but
okay.
but it was closer to Minneapolis, easier to interact with it's more diverse community, and so it's still pretty white, but there is some diversity, I should say. So and because I had children, and we lived in a community where other people had children, then the children would play together outside. And so there was more interaction. And it was a more affluent neighborhood. And if nothing else, we at least have conversations over the fence, so to speak. So, but we didn't do a lot of socializing. We didn't do any socializing with neighbors when we first moved out here. And then we moved again in Plymouth. We moved a little further west. And in this house that we're living in now, we do some interacting and sharing meals with neighbors. And but the street we live on now is much more diverse than the previous place where we lived.
Tell us about that diversity. How are you assessing that, or what does it mean to be more diverse for you?
Well, the first place we moved to, there was diversity of age. Okay, so there was the guy next door was in his 80s. The people next door, their children had left home. The people across the street had just bought from someone else that had moved, and then later more neighbors left the neighborhood and younger families moved in. So we had conversations back and forth and interacted with neighbors around children and activities and seeing them at different events and participating in that way. In our current neighborhood, so in that neighborhood, I should say, there was no diversity of race, just age, and pretty monolithic in that way. But here, my next door neighbor is a biracial couple. She's Asian, and he's white. And then the next couple next over is Indian. They're Indian, from India. And then the couple next are white. So and so the rest, that's the diversity, the rest of the neighborhood is white, And I do think there is, not far from here, but not close enough to interact with there. But I've seen on walks, a couple of black people that I've driven by, which was more than I ever saw in my other neighborhood. So there's at least you see people that look like you where I am at now.
And how were you able to get settled and to make your neighborhood part of your home?
That's a good question. The first few years, it was raising kids and all the activity, a lot of activity outside the home or inside the home. Family members, we have relatives in St. Paul that I would interact with, making it easier to be out here amongst where I'm not with people that look like me. How was I able to make it my home? By wherever I lived, in the other house, in this house, I lived where I could see nature, and so I nurtured my spirit by probably detaching a little from the whiteness and the exclusion by connecting with nature, having my comfortable home environment, and by keeping up my interactions with family and friends that lived in other communities.
So how would you characterize your neighborhood when you first moved there?
When I first moved here, this is a new house that was built. So, and we're at the end of a lane. So the house next to us wasn't built. And then the house where the people of color live, the two houses in between hadn't been built. So, I don't know if they realized there was a black person living there and that made it more attractive for them, but I was the first one here. So, but a neighbor came over and brought cookies and snacks and treats, and that was kind of a surprise. So that was really nice, welcoming us to the neighborhood. So, so that was, yeah. So that was my experience, that it was a good experience to be welcomed into the neighborhood.
I'm curious about your relationship with that neighbor since then. How is that?
It went nowhere else. We just said hello and all of that. And I think it could have been partly me, or, I didn't reach out to her very much. Her backyard faced my front yard. So, but we didn't develop a relationship. So I just see her walking her dog and we'd say hello and that type of thing.
You mentioned, hinted at it already a little bit, but what was life like for your children growing up in the Plymouth area and Plymouth area schools?
Well, I have to say that my oldest son, Jonathan, has Down syndrome. So in some ways, I always wondered how there's an impact from having someone with disabilities in your family that creates some isolation and separation. And so but yet the kids, when in there, and then I have a daughter who's about 18 months younger than my son with Down syndrome. And there was I think what she would say, what she's told me is that in her early years, she always felt that she was she could make friends with some. She had some friends, but as she got older, it became more of a challenge. So, but we did play dates, and when she was younger, it was, she went to all the birthday parties, but partly the school required that the parents invite all the students so that they didn't just pick and choose certain kids that they wanted to come. So they asked that if you had a birthday party that you would invite the entire class. And so, but my daughter would say that it got to be a struggle as the older she got, the more she felt that she was restricted or not invited in to some of the groups. But she always had friends, because there was always a few that that were accepting. She had one friend from the second grade. They've been best friends. She's over her house right now. She's white, but they've been friends forever. Although the mother and I had some, because I think the mother, I don't know. Anyway, I thought there was some racial stuff, there was some racial tension. But the daughters dead set on being friends, and their family accepted Jade as part of their family, and she even calls the girl's auntie, and her uncle, and so she's a grandma. She's just part of their family, her extended family. So she's been able to because I just encourage her to be friends with who's, some of these kids are not the best people to be friends with, anyway. So, but she did notice it, and it did hurt her heart. It's heart-wrenching when you grow up with people, and because she's, at the same school since she was 4 years old, and then to not be invited into some of their parties and activities. That was really hard. And then when she played soccer, she played team soccer. And she went to I sent my daughter to a private school, even though we're in a good school district. But because I have a son with disabilities, I felt like she would, I had to spend so much, give him so much attention that I felt like she should be somewhere where she was getting a lot of attention as well. And so we sent her to a private school, and but when she played team soccer, club soccer, she played with kids in the Wayzata school district in Orono and in this area. And I think she felt that excluded, that she didn't really fit closely with them in that setting either, even though she played soccer with them for years, many years. And we didn't socialize too much with the parents either. Now, I'm not saying this is all about race. Some of this is, some of it is about, our, having a kid with disabilities, and some of it's, maybe my personality. But so I'm not assigning blame. I'm just telling what happened.
And how did you respond to your children's experience or their expression of their experiences?
Well, to listen and to just agree with her perception of because she was offering up why, she was figuring this out and expressing, she felt like because as a family, we didn't interact with some of these other families, that she was missing out on relationships with them because we didn't interact, because they would form friend groups based around who the parents were interacting with. And so she came to that, and I agreed with her on that. And then with the kids from school, she said on the club team, on the soccer club team, she said a lot of them go to school together, and so, or their parents interact. So that kind of put her on the outside. But she still had friends on the team, but she still felt ostracized. So my thing was to just encourage her, and I had heard at her middle school, or at her lower school, elementary school, the principal had told us that if your kid has one good friend, then that's enough. So apparently the research was that they didn't have to be in the in crowd or with a big group of people. If they had one good friend, that was good enough to give them stability. And so I didn't worry about it too much, and I just encouraged her in her friends. But we did what we did do is the black families at her private school, we started meeting together. And so we formed our own group. And so we would meet at each other's homes and do things and let the kids get to know each other and do things together as families together. And so that was one way we handled the challenges because the black families didn't mind if I had a kid with Down syndrome, and if I was a mixed couple, we were a mixed couple, we were all, there were single mothers and other mixed couples. So we would all get together and so that was one way. And so she had those deeper connections as well as she was growing up in school. So, and she also had, they had connections with neighborhood kids and the like. So I'm not sure I answered your question, but if I didn't, just ask it again and I'll
yes, you
give it
can
another go.
Tell me about how this parent group got established and for what reason.
Well, I think I was noticing a new black kid came to school. There was just drama at the school, and part of it was around my daughter's friend's mother. The white girl that she got to be friends with, and her mother was having some problems, and I don't know what was going on, but there was just a lot of drama, and I thought it had something to do with race. We thought some of the black mothers thought there's something going on here that's not right, and so we felt like we needed to bond together we need to bond together so we can address any problems that could come up and make sure that our children are protected and not blamed and not harassed. And so that's how we started meeting together. And it was just a way to deal with the isolation of being in an all-white community and needing comrades. And so we became very close together, very close, even till, to this day.
And outside of the school, how did you engage with other organizations and community groups and businesses in the Plymouth area?
Well, let's see. I decided to run for office because I got involved with when Obama was running for president. I had read his book, and I said if he runs for president, I'll do everything I can to help him get elected. And so I started getting involved in civic organizing, and then when the health care bill was up, I did a lot of organizing around that and got involved in progressive groups. And I had already been doing some work as a mother with a child with disabilities. I was the parent representative for the West Suburban School District. And so I did a lot of organizing with parents of children with disabilities, bringing them together and organizing events where families with disabilities could get together. And so I'd already been doing that type of work, and so I stretched my organizing into the political realm and then into the Affordable Care Act and other local and national issues. When I decided that ordinary, average people need to be the ones elected be our elected officials instead of career politicians who were beholden to lobbyists and big money. And I feel that we who are mothers, who are daughters, parents of children with disabilities, Black women, Black men, gay, straight, lesbian, transgender, the more diverse our politics, the better our outcomes. And I actually heard Bill Clinton speak a few years ago, and he said that if because we were in a room and there was very few Black people, and he probably couldn't see me because I was up in the balcony, but it was mostly white people. And he said, if we in this monolithic, and he said that if we came up with some ideas and some solutions about something, he said, and then I went and I got a room of diverse people all together and we came up with solutions. Inevitably, the solutions that we come up with this diverse group of people is going to be better than what we get with this monolithic group of people. And I believe that very strongly when it comes to politics. And so I ran for office because I said, we need to have the courage to step out and do bold and big things if we want change. And I was very afraid of what was going on politically. I could see the handwriting on the wall for what's going on now. So I ran for office and for Congressional District 3 because we really needed to get that flipped over. And I did not win. I ended up getting the DFL endorsement the second time I ran. And but I do now I see so many people stepping up, and I know that in my own area many people got the courage. I think I'd like to believe that because I ran, it encouraged other average everyday people and some not so average everyday people to have the courage enough to step up to run. So that was how I got involved. But I believe the question was how I got involved with Black groups. My heart, and even as I was doing the organizing around Obama's campaign, my heart, and even when I was doing work around disabilities, my heart has been with inner city youth and with Black people in general, because I've lived in all white communities. I've lived, I live a privileged life, to be honest with you. Even though I'm Black, I live in a great neighborhood, and I have several grocery stores around and gas stations, and it's just a nice environment. But I'm still Black. I still get pulled over by the cops more than my husband does. Although recently, when I first moved out here, I got pulled over by the police on a regular basis until my kids, they're like, Mom got pulled over again. And they didn't understand why I kept getting pulled over. And, but what's interesting is the last few years, all of a sudden, I'm not getting pulled over all the time. And I remarked on that just as an aside in the conversation I was having that involved the Minnetonka police chief. And he said a couple of years ago, some of the suburban police groups police chiefs got together with some local organizing groups and started having conversations, and they started changing their method of policing. And I can't remember the name of the group that he mentioned. And I kind of chuckled to myself. It's like, oh, that's why I'm not getting pulled over all the time. They started changing some of their. It just was remarkable to me. I just kind of and they wouldn't give me. Oftentimes they wouldn't give me a ticket. They just pulled me over and just you're running a yellow light or whatever, you know. So. But my heart is always I have nieces and nephews and my children and just the black children I see out here in the schools. And I a few years ago, about 7 years ago, I started working with an organization called Community Mediation and Restorative Services, and part of that work was entailed going into schools as doing restorative justice work. And usually the problems were around black students in predominantly white spaces, and there was always there's drama. But what I started seeing, and which was heart-wrenching, is the systemic problems. You bring the kid in, you want the kid to apologize for what they did wrong. And sometimes I would be the representative for the community, and I would tell the young child, look, I'm a community member, and I'm sorry for how we failed you. Because this problem is not this child's problem. This is a systemic problem. This is a problem that goes beyond, he did wrong, or usually it was a he. He did wrong, or she did wrong, something wrong. But it's a minor wrong compared to the big wrong and the neglect of treating these children as full citizens, as full people, without caring about why they're acting out in that way. And so there's something very, very wrong. And I got to see how white children were treated in white schools versus how black children are treated in white schools, and even in schools that were predominantly mixed environments. And so I have gotten involved in just working for social justice and in that way. Now I'm getting my temperature up here.
Yeah.
My passion starts rising here, We got to change this now.
Tell us about where that passion comes from.
Well, I think it comes from knowing that it doesn't have to be this way. When I was growing up, I said my father was in the Air Force, and we lived in Germany when I was 4 years old, 4 years old to 8 years old. So I was young, and some of my first memories are living in Germany. And when we first moved there wasn't housing on the base, so we lived out amongst the German people. And we lived in a duplex in the top level of the German family's house. They lived on the bottom. So I was 4 years old, and I spent a lot of time downstairs with the German family. And the father was deceased, but she had 2 adult sons who would go out and work during the day. I would hang out with her, and she'd peeling potato. I remember, standing, touching, so close to her I could touch her side while she's peeling potatoes. And if they didn't see me in a few days, they would come up and knock on the door and ask if I could come down and have dinner with them. And I remember the boys, they would just get right in my face and talk to me. I don't know if I knew what they were saying because they were speaking German and I was speaking English. But what I felt was such a comfort, such a caring, such an appreciation. And then we later had babysitters. A German couple would come and babysit when my parents would travel. And I felt that same openness and acceptance and that shared humanity. So we moved back to the United States, and I'm around white people, and they don't see me. I'm not seen. I literally am 8 years old, and the shutters of their eyes close when they look at me. And I sensed this as a kid. I could sense the difference, that there's something wrong here with these people, these white people. There's something, they're telling me that I'm not welcome. They're telling me that I don't belong. And I think our society tells us that as Black people. It tells us that as women as well. But one of my experiences, I went to an all-white school in Biloxi, Mississippi. When in 7th grade, my dad was shipped off to Vietnam. He did 2 tours, one in Guam and one in, Okasawa. I can't remember the name of the city. But we were in Biloxi, Mississippi. And when it came time to go to school, the school calls my dad and says, there's a Black school that is very good right down the road from here that your children can go to. My brother was in the 9th, I was in the 7th. So he goes and tells his captain on the base, and they call the school, and apparently, from what I remember, they told the school, because then segregation was illegal anyway, and they said that they would pull all their federal funding. That's part of the reason, and politically you see some states they don't want the federal government involved in their education system, because then there's requirements that they have to meet. And one of them was you can't, particularly someone in the military, they're not going to get one bus and bus 2 kids over to this all-Black school and all the other kids go to the all-white school. So it was either all or none, and you get your federal funding or you don't. And so the school decided it was okay to take these 2 Black kids. So we go to the school, and now I've been in all-white schools all my life. And so I sit as close to the front as I can. I was pretty bright, knew all the answers, knew all the, now, I kid you not, I was just like straight A student, and everything was not hard for me. But I wrote a play, and the teacher read it to the class and said, how could you let Sharon be better than you? Took it to the 9th grade class, read it to them. How could you, told my brother, she taught him too in English, told my brother, how in front of his classmates, how could you let your sister do better than you? And she took me to the principal, pointed down at me. I remember he had a plaid shirt on, and he had a grin on his face, and she pointed down at me and said, "That's the one." So it was like I was a criminal. I was the bad one. That's the way it appeared. I had outshined the kids in her class. I had outshined the 9th graders. My brother was shamed. He ran away from home. He was humiliated. His sister had done it to him. And so it broke up our relationship. It put a wedge between our relationship. And I thought the cruelty of the school teacher, of the white school teacher who has so much power that she could destroy a family from the inside out. And I just think of my heart just goes out to young people who are experiencing that, not necessarily from a school teacher, but from society in general. The cruelty. And I think of what I went through in my life, the pain I suffered because, and the limits I put on myself because of what that teacher did, where it was like, if you do well, then you will be shamed. You will hurt people if you do well. If you do well, we don't want you here. Although they didn't want me anyway. But if you do well, it makes other people feel bad. And so I think I put limits on myself. And I didn't become all that I could have been because of that experience in that all-white school. And so when I look at Black youth, I see myself. I see potential, untapped, tapped down, broken, needing to be healed and resurrected. And I think of how much better our nation would be if we were to recognize, if we were to lift up these students. We will be better for it. We will all be better for it. And so that's where my passion comes from.
And so when you take that passion to Plymouth with their public officials, their Parks and Recs department, your neighbors, what has been the response?
I haven't I don't know. I've been working and focused more on restorative justice, working nationally, working at statewide, as opposed to I know the police chief here, and he'll listen, if I have specifics to give to him. But I am basically right now my energy isn't directly in Plymouth. It's although when they were trying not to we wanted to build Beacon wanted to build an affordable housing project out here, and the city council was against that, and I participated in working to get that that policy passed that would allow them to build. But so I get involved in if there's issues that need to be addressed, and but most of my energies and focus have been turned recently have been at the state level. One thing I've been working on is housing, helping prevent evictions, because that disrupts families, and how can we help people? I had some rental property, and so I understand how difficult it is, oftentimes single women, and when the spouse ends up going to jail for getting involved in the legal system. And I've been involved at the state level. I said the state level, but recently I've really been involved in there's one of the things that one of the people I started working with, looking for how do we create systemic nationwide change that will impact all of us together. And I got attracted to the work of Rion Eisler. Rion Eisler wrote The Chalice and the Blade, The Real Wealth of Nations, and many other books. And so I studied with her. I have been working on building a caring economy. What does it take to so I've been mostly involved in looking at how we create systemic change. So I've been interested in the work of Rion Eisler and the work of Fania Davis. She wrote The Little Book of Race and Restorative Justice. And Rion Eisler brings to the picture the concept, the idea of a caring economy. And let me say this, the other organization I've been tapped into is Isaiah, whose political arm is Faith in Minnesota. And Isaiah is a collaborative of progressive churches and also partnered with other organizations like Black Barbers, Black and Beauty Shops and Barbers, and preschool and nursery school child care groups, and the Somali organization, and a Latina arm, and so all of these groups coming together to work to build a caring economy and a multiracial democracy, and a caring economy. So those are the three legs of my stool: the work of Rion Eisler, who talks about the real wealth of nations, building a caring economy, and the work of Fania, who talks about race and restorative justice being all under one umbrella, and then the work of Isaiah, which is the action, let's get out and get it done, the political action, let's make it happen. And so that's what I've been focusing my attention on right now, is flipping the Senate. In working with Isaiah to flip the Senate, we need to flip 6 seats in the Senate so that we can help get our agenda passed through the Senate and start building that multiracial democracy and a caring economy. In this past legislative session, we got 6 of our agenda items passed through the House. They stalled in the Senate. So now we have to flip the Senate, and then we'll be able to get our agenda passed. Tim Walz is already on board, and we'll be able to begin creating that multiracial democracy and a caring economy. So that's where I'm focusing my energy.
How did you start to focus on the statewide concerns and beyond the neighborhood issues and the school issues?
Well, because the problems are systemic, and and as a matter of fact, Fania talks about the 3 levels of racism. You know, she talks about it as the systemic, the institutional, and then I forget what she calls it, but the interpersonal racism. So we can deal with the interpersonal all we want. We can deal with the institutional racism in our schools all we want. But if systemic racism is still there, is still the lay of the land, then nothing will change. We're just moving chairs around. But we have to deal with the systemic, the stories. Rion Eisler talks about part of the way we build culture is through the stories, our narratives. And the narratives in the United States support racism and division. And so we have to start changing our stories, changing the narratives. And we can do so, we can start changing how we interact with people. Policy helps, but working with Isaiah has a relational approach to policy change, where you're actually talking to with a person. Each voter, instead of just calling and saying go vote, you're calling and telling a story. You're having a conversation. You're relational, and you're relating to them in a way that they start buying into your vision of democracy. They start buying in to how wonderful it could be for them to live in a multiracial caring democracy with a caring economy. And so you're building those relationships. When you're looking at restorative justice, you're doing conversations. One of the things, I just wrote a letter to the lieutenant governor and asked her to consider doing statewide conversations so neighbors and people can come together and have conversations, building a vision of who we are together, changing the narrative, changing the systemic nature of how we view our brothers and sisters. So that's how I got to that. My heart is still in the schools, right? I'm still, I may still volunteer and still help out where needed, but I'm looking at the big picture. How do we change it for those? Because in order to change it for those Black kids in the schools, their situation needs to be different. You know, they need to be able to keep their homes. They need to have affordable housing. They need their fathers not to be criminalized. They need to have safe water and good air, unpolluted air and water. And so we need to address the systemic problems and while we're at the same time dealing with the institutional problems, while we're at the same time dealing with the interpersonal.
How does your experience in Champlin and Plymouth influence the conversations that you're having about these systemic challenges?
Well, I think that we have to break the wall down of Minnesota nice, because I'm tolerated in these neighborhoods, but I'm comfortable not dealing with my white neighbors. I'm very comfortable not dealing with them because, you know, the differences, I don't want to deal with the differences. I don't want to deal with the fakeness, you know, the fake Minnesota nice. I don't want to deal with the unknowns. So I consider myself part of the problem in the way I have dealt with neighbors and interacted with them. And I could have been more outgoing and tried harder. But Minnesota nice for me is a shuttering of the eyes. My experience as a little kid where white people would shutter their eyes, they would be looking around and you know their eyes are open, but they don't see you in a way, figuratively speaking, but you can sense it, that wall that's gone up. And so I didn't try to break that wall down. And I think that's why I recommend these community conversations so that neighbors can get in the same room or the same Zoom room or face-to-face room, whichever, or the same park, area and come together and have honest and open conversations so we can get real with each other and get beyond Minnesota fake and Minnesota nice or black nice, black fake. Because we'll fake it too. We'll all fake it. Hi. And really, the walls are up, the eyes are shuttered, and we're not hearing, we're not listening, and we go into our own little circles, and we're not really being a neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. And so how do you think you've improved Plymouth by your living there?
Well, I'm an election judge, so, I see my neighbors and, they see me, and I get to show diversity in the community. I have volunteered in the schools, helping young readers, and I did that for many years. I was the parent representative for the West Suburban School District. I have confronted the school around issues of race and discrimination and bias, and gotten a commitment from them that they're going to address some of these issues. I've been involved in organizing. I had international students, a few that I helped sponsor to come here, and they contributed to the community here. And as a matter of fact, one of the students that I sponsored helped raise money for tents for hurricane victims to raise funds, help raise funds to give tents to families that have been displaced as a result of hurricanes across the world. So I've been able to bring that diversity here, not necessarily black students, but people, Paraguay, Brazil, and Hong Kong. I've also been I've been a foster parent to a Latina person with disabilities, and I've had this diversity myself because I feel that everybody matters and everyone counts. And if that's what gets sent my way, that's who I'm going to help, because I want other people to help our black kids just the same as they would help white kids or any others. So I have volunteered, like I said, volunteered in the schools doing restorative justice work, and lobbied the city council for local affordable housing. So, and I've done police ride-arounds, on National Day Out, which keeps me away from my own National Day Out, but I do participate in National Day Out. But I've been riding around with the police, but not in Plymouth. That's been in Brooklyn Park and, was it Brooklyn Park? Yeah, Brooklyn Park. I've been riding around with the police officers on National Night Out, representing mediation and restorative justice. So those are some of the things that I've done and contribute, some of the ways I've contributed to. And I've done some work with the DFL party and with local politicians, helping get them elected.
And how do you feel your life has improved by living in the Champlin, Plymouth areas?
Well, this COVID-19 has made me aware of how blessed I am. And I realize that I can hold grief and gratitude in my heart space. Grief for those who are still suffering, who have lack, unemployed, lack of food, suffering illnesses, COVID and any other. And then gratitude for the space that I have here where I don't have to worry about food. I order my food. It gets dropped at the door. I don't even have to go to the grocery store to get it. I have people, white people that come and clean my house for me. I look out in a wooded lot. We have 3 acres here in Plymouth. That they can't build on it, but it belongs to our house, this lot. And I know my neighbors. I can volunteer and work and do things that I love. My children, everybody in my family's working, getting an income, all 4 of us. Even my daughter who's home from college, she's got a job, full-time job. My son, who has Down syndrome, works for the Down Syndrome Association part-time, and he's working from home. So we have a good life here, and I believe that everyone should have an opportunity to have a good life, and that's my hope.
And you've mentioned it a little bit before, but what has been your response to the current COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, like I said, I hold the grief and the gratitude. But after George Floyd died, and I, contributed to the food bank and things like that, and continue to work politically through Zoom and work with restorative justice through Zoom, and advocate for change. So I've been doing a lot of that work. One big project I'm working on is helping prevent people from getting addicted once the moratorium on addictions is lifted. Working on that. But a friend of mine who lives over in South Minneapolis after George Floyd was assassinated called and said, "Sharon, you got to come over, and we need your help over here." And I couldn't imagine what I could do. I'm like, well, we can, I do mediation, restorative justice work. And she says, no, you just got to come over here and let them look you in your eyes and let them see you. And even with the COVID, I got my mask and headed over. And on 3 different occasions, I went and I listened to the men who lived in that area, Black men. I just listened and looked in their eyes, and I asked them, what's going on? How are you feeling? What's happening? And I was shocked that they told me. One man said, I have a anxiety disorder. I'm all stressed out, Another man said, why now? Why him? People have been getting killed around all this time, and basically had given up hope. Nothing's going to change. And then another man said, I've had 20 of my friends get killed, and I'm numb. I'm just numb. And I just listened, and I just listened. And I can only hope that I had no solutions to offer, but I listened. And so that's my, you asked about COVID, and I told you about George Floyd, because they're all integrated together in my mind at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, before we end, is there anything else that you thought I should have asked or you wanted to share?
I think I've shared more than I thought I would share. I hope it wasn't too long. That was quite a while.
No, you've been great.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening.
All right, Sharon. Thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye, Jeremiah.